Good morning, Year 9. And I am actually genuinely really sorry not to get to see you in person for our last Year 9 lesson. But I am isolating at home, like many of you. So we're going for one last hit of consolidation, okay? So we're going to end this term really secure on the key aspects, the what, how, whys of these amazing poems. Okay, so look to the board. You will see that we have got pictures. Each picture has a letter. That's important. We have an A, a B, a C, a D, an E, an F, and a G. Now, the very first thing you need to do is to write down those letters. And then for each letter, they're inspired by the picture. What is the name of the poem and what war does it link to? So at this point, I'm going to ask the teacher in the room, they can press pause on the YouTube video. They can allow you, I wouldn't give you more than a minute and a half. This is a quick recap. Time just to write down the name, the letter, the name of the poem, and the war it links to. Now, if you can remember anything else, dates of the war, if you can remember the writers, that's good additional information. But we definitely want the name of the poem and the war it links to. In 3, 2, 1, go. Okay, so we're going to have a look at the answers together, and you can give yourself a mark for the name and a mark for the war if you are right. So if we look to the top then to letter A, yep, so we've got that beautiful poppies, which can only be poppies. Now, interestingly, poppies kind of doesn't locate itself within one particular war. It's what we call a retrospective. It's reflecting on all wars. So that idea as well, that's what poppies and why we use poppies to commemorate war and our memory of war. And it's all the wars that we have ever fought. So really poppies is like this inclusive poem that doesn't just directly address one war, but all wars. And the idea that we continue to get into these conflicts, we continue in our humanity to get to a place of fighting and of war. So if you're gave yourself a mark for poppies and wars. So then we've got B. This is actually an image of a kamikaze pilot, so a Japanese pilot from World War II in B. So there he is. Now under that cap would be his shaven head full of powerful incantation. Okay, so this idea of somebody fighting in World War II for the Japanese with this belief, this ideology that sacrifice is honorable, that sacrificial death would be honorable. And however, the conflict, the internal conflict for our kamikaze pilot is he suddenly realizes he doesn't want to die. And he chooses to follow his inner voice, that desire to live, and he returns home only to be ostracized, only to be cast, out, to become the outcast, to become the pariah. Okay, so C. Now there we have that beautiful image of the horse there. Okay, that's our charge of the Light Brigade. And that is our earliest war. It takes us back to the Crimean War, where the British actually got involved. Really, it was a power conflict, a power struggle, a conflict over land and power and access to land, and we got involved. Okay, so that was the Crimean War, charge of the Light Brigade. Okay, so D down at the bottom there, the camera, got to be war photographer. Now, again, there are clues in this poem, references to the Vietnam War, but this idea that it's dealing with more modern wars, such as the Vietnam War. And look at the time span. So we are going from the Crimean War through to modern wars. So what are all of these poems telling us? That power and conflict is played out in the landscape or upon the landscape of war has not stopped. We've not solved this problem, have we? We still fight. We still go to war against each other. Okay, so then we've got an image of trench warfare, or trench life, sorry, for E. Our soldiers asleep in the trenches, and that takes us to the poem Exposure, with its World War I experiences, the autobiographical, the first-hand experience of Wilfred Owen as a soldier. And this image captures that nothing happens moment, that sense of futility, that war doesn't end. And actually, again, the futility of war is played out across all these poems because we see that war is part of our historic kind of timeline, isn't it? It doesn't disappear off the timeline at all. Okay, so F, so trying to capture a picture there of modern warfare, modern soldiers. Brilliant. If you've got remains in the Gulf War, that is a good mark. Yep, we can give ourselves a mark for that one. And then we've got G. Okay, the image of the bayonet, just showing you there, that's a practice image. That's soldiers practicing bayonet charge, that kind of bayonet warfare. Okay, from World War II. But look in itself, it just almost makes you think in just that moment, that proximity, that war is often as well about being futile, and waiting for something to happen, but then when it happens, it's that proximity of getting up close to the person whose life you have to take. So guys, we've got the Crimean War from 1853 to 1856, all the way up to remains, modern warfare, the Gulf War in the 1990s. So what's the overarching message here? War doesn't end. Don't mean to depress us as we begin our summer holiday, but this idea that man's inhumanity to man, our ability to enact our power against other countries, other nations, has not gone away. Okay, so we've written those down. Brilliant. Giving yourself a mark. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. That gives us a mark out of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so 7 poems, and you give yourself a mark there out of 7. Now, again, just going to give you a little bit of consolidation time. Can you complete the quotations and name the right poem? Now, guys, I'm a method if you can. Okay, so leant against it like a. Now, I've done that bit for you. That's from Poppies. It's a simile because we've got the word like in it. But how would we complete that simile from Poppies? Now, I absolutely want you to write these lines down into your books. The more you practice writing lines out, it aids memory. And we know that there's an expectation that you have to learn lines from the poems. So we've got leant against it like a blank, blank, blank. His blank, blank stays on the street. There's not to make blank. There's not to reason blank. There's but to blank or blank. We blank in holes, sweating like blank from his chest, 100 blank in black and white. So guys, I'm going to ask the teacher with you just to press pause at this stage. I reckon we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I'm going to give you about 6 minutes. That's a really generous 6 minutes. Guys, Miss will or Sir will check in with you if you get your lines written and completed within that 6 minutes. They can just press pause or unpress pause, press play maybe even, and then we're going to look at those answers together. Okay, guys, so I'm going to say it. I'm hoping you're ready to say back to me the missing word. So, leant against it like a wishbone. So that's Poppies. That's the simile, the wishbone. Okay, his stays on the street. So in 3, 2, 1, the answer is good. It's his blood shadow stays on the street. Okay, we're going to go through which poem and the method in a minute, okay? So there's not to make. Now, I find it really hard to say the blank here because I want to say the words that fill in these lines because this is a very rhythmical line. The whole structure of this poem is designed to create the rhythm and the pace of a charge. So theirs is not to make, reply, brilliant. Theirs is not to reason, why, there's but to do or die. So there's not to make, reply, there's not to reason why, there's but to do or die. Brilliant. Okay, what about this one? We blank in holes. So in 3, 2, 1, the answer is we, did you get it? Cringe in holes. Brilliant. Now this one, sweating like from his chest. So in 3, 2, 1, the answer is sweating like molten iron from his chest. Brilliant. And last but not least, 100 agonies in black and white. So guys, you have got the words now to fill in, just to remind you of the poems that they're from then. So leant against it like a wishbone, Poppies. Now we know it's a simile because we've got this like. So just to give us a little bit of context, is going to be important for our next activity. So who is leant like a wishbone? Can we remember in Poppies, who's the voice of this poem? Right, so we've got a mother leant against it, the war memorial. Okay, leant against the war memorial like a wishbone. And we talked about that wishbone being something very fragile and easily broken. Now, remains. So we know now it's his blood shadow stays on the street. But What do we mean by blood shadow? What's it a reference to? Right, so it's a reference to the man that's being killed, the man that is dead. Now, when we talk about that moment, then, he's using a metaphor. He's describing the dead man as if he's something else. Okay, so the something else is a blood shadow. So he's using this metaphor of a blood shadow to represent the dead man. So he doesn't say the dead guy, he doesn't say the man I murdered, he says blood shadow. So that metaphor will have significance in a minute. Now, there's not to make reply, there's not to reason why, there's to do or die. So we've got the charge of the light brigade. We've got that lovely use here of repetition. There's. The use of rhyme, reply, why, die. And it creates that rhythm, and the dactyl rhythm of this poem, like a horse charge. Okay, now in exposure, which word was missing? Cringe. Now, cringe here, is it a noun, verb, adjective, or adverb? So if you just think about this word cringe, brilliant, it's a verb. So it's telling us how these men act. And they are cringing. This is not a heroic image. This is not a glorious image. Okay, now we've also got then sweating like molten iron from his chest. So we've got our like again. So that's telling us we're looking at a simile. Now, when I know Miss did the Miss Lockett and the feedback from the mock, we were looking at the importance of that how, bridging your what and your why by really understanding the how moments. In all these poems, similes and metaphors can be such a gift because they're memorable. You can identify them and they give you the opportunity to dive in and say something really clever and deep about them. So we will look at that in a minute. So sweating like molten iron, and then 100 agonies in black and white. Guys, who is she really describing in this poem, in this line? What's the 100 agonies? Yeah, it's all the dead. It's all the injured and the dead people that the war photographer is taking photos of. So when you describe one thing as if it is something else, you're looking at metaphor. So 100 agonies in black and white is a metaphor for the injured and dying people. So far, so good. Now, I'm going to ask you to pause in a minute, and you're going to have 3 minutes to use the information on the board to create your own definition of power. Because it's kind of like the elephant in the room. We haven't mentioned explicitly that all of these poems are grouped under this theme of power and conflict. So as we're moving and consolidating and bringing these poems together, getting ready to end the term, I suddenly realised we haven't really engaged with that, which is what's going to be our main focus today. So guys, I'm going to read it to you, and then you're going to have 3 minutes roughly. Whoever is in the room with you, the lovely teacher, will press pause to give you time to do this. So using this definition, what does power mean? So it says that power actually has 7 different definitions. So power is quite a complex idea. It's a complex and a word to understand. It means fundamentally your ability to do or act. So I have the power to do or act. I have the capability to do or accomplish something. So a powerful person, somebody who has power, has the ability to do or act maybe as they please, as they want. So powerlessness or a lack of power means that you don't have the capacity or the ability to do something. Okay, guys, power can also mean political or national strength. So power can mean strength, political strength, national strength. So war is often about a struggle for power. You've got nation fighting against nation over strength, over power. Power can mean the great or marked ability to do. So it says here it can mean strength, might, force. So if you are powerless, what's the opposite of strength? Maybe weakness. Okay, so powerless people are considered weak, incapable of moving. Power is the possession of control or command over others. Oh, strong one. It's authority. It's ascendancy. So in bayonet charge, who really has the power? Does the soldier have the power? Is he in control? Does he have command over others? Or is he actually under somebody else's power, somebody else's control? Okay, power can also mean political ascendancy, which means to rise up or control in the government of a state. Power can mean the legal ability, capacity, or authority. Power can be the delegated authority, that somebody empowers you for a moment. They delegate authority to you. You're granted authority in order to do something. So, for example, the police are powerful because the authority has been given to them. Okay? A prime minister, in theory, is powerful because the voters give him power and authority. So, guys, there's lots of big ideas here, but I just want you in 3 minutes to take some of these keywords and create your own power definition. So you could say power means that you are strong, that you have the might and force to do what you want. Power means that you get to control and command others. Power means that you have authority. So you're going to write your own definition of power using the ideas on the board in the following 3 minutes. Off you go. Okay, so hopefully you've got a definition of power that we can refer back to, because we're going to link power and conflict into these poems as our activity, as our kind of final consolidation. But we just needed to check in that we know what power means, and similarly what conflict means. Now again, power and conflict are these big words that have under the umbrella of power and conflict lots of different meanings. So we're going to do a similar activity. I'm just going to talk to you about these definitions, some related words, and then in 3 minutes to write down your own kind of definition of conflict. Okay, so conflict is a struggle or clash between opposing forces. It's a battle. So we could say that all of our war poems in some way clearly link to a physical struggle or clash between two opposing forces. So you've got, you know, in World War I and World War II, the opposing forces, the English versus the Germans. Yep, the Allied forces versus Germany. So it can be more than that, though. It can be a state of opposition between ideas, between interests. So, for example, in Kamikaze, it's not so much a battle between the Japanese pilot and the opposing forces, is it? It's a conflict within himself. He has this conflict, this clash of ideas, because he doesn't agree with what he's being asked to do. So a conflict can also mean a clash. Okay, now this is the psychological definition of conflict. Okay, a little bit wordy, but quite interesting for us. The opposition between two simultaneous but incompatible wishes or drives, something leading to a state of emotional tension. Now, our characters that we encounter in these poems actually often come to a place of this simultaneous but incompatible wish or drive. We've got soldiers that wish to be at home but can't. It's incompatible with where they are. We've got soldiers that wish the war was over, but it isn't. We have soldiers that don't agree with what, sacrificing their lives. Okay, so conflict can mean to come into opposition, to clash, to fight. It can mean to collide, to oppose, to encounter. It can mean to have a battle. You can have, now I love this, external conflicts and internal conflicts. So we can be at war with ourselves on the inside and at war with other people on the outside. Conflict can be a quarrel. In every quarrel, you have the agonist, the baddie, you have the class struggle, you have conflict, you have fighting, you have a state of war. So guys, we have big ideas here. Yep, it's a fight, a battle, it's a controversy, a collision. So again, just highlighting in one page that this is a big idea. What I want you to do in the next 3 minutes is to just write down some keywords to help you start to anchor into what conflict means for you. Okay, so you just write those down, your definition of conflict, in the next 3 minutes. Okay, so this is what power and conflict mean out of the context of the poems. Our next job is to put it into the context of the poems. And we're going to use our diveable quotations. Now, guys, for each quotation, we're all going to answer the 3 key questions. Okay? I'm going to talk you through it and then you're going to answer it in your books. The extra questions at the side are just some talking points, because a diveable quotation is learning to recognize that in these poems there are quotations that are really deep, that you can dive deep, that you can go beyond the surface level and really begin to go deep into what the quotation might mean. You dive into it again and again and again. Okay, so we're going to look at each of our key lines today, and we're going to think about which words or phrases are what I'm going to start saying are neon standout words. And is the overall image an image of power or powerlessness? And is it an image of conflict? Now, the answer is going to have to be tied with this word because. So I'm going to talk and then you're going to pause and you're going to write down your answers to the questions. Now, if you can write as I'm talking, you can go. So if we look against at this quote, okay, leant against it like a wishbone. Which is the word, if you had to pick just one word that stands out for you, which is the word that you think is the powerful, the neon, the standout word in that image? And give me a reason why. So everybody now write down the neon standout word is because. Off you go. Now, you might have said wishbone. I'm drawn to wishbone. Now, why is that a standout word? It might be because it's an image of frailty, of fragility. A wishbone is something that's easily broken. A wishbone is something you break in order to make your wish come true. So what is this woman wishing for? The return of her son. And the desire for her son breaks her. It's made her fragile. It's made her broken. So when it says the simile leant against it like a wishbone, it is the woman, the mother, the grieving mother that is broken and fragile. So does that create an image of power or powerlessness? Is this an image of somebody that's powerful, that has power, that has control, that is in command and in authority, or is it someone that's powerless? Yeah, it's a powerless image, isn't it? So where or what has taken this woman's power? Where's her strength of control gone? What's rendered her as being powerless? So if we look at some of these other key questions, okay? So what emotion is this woman experiencing that's made her powerless? Yeah, so this is a moment of grief. So what are we learning under this bigger umbrella of power and conflict? That grief makes us powerless, that it takes our power, that when we grieve, we lose control, we lose command of ourselves, of a situation. Okay, is there an image of conflict in this line? She leant against it like a wishbone. Is there any sense of her being at war with herself? Any idea? Is there a fight going on inside of her, do you think? What's she fighting to do in this poem? Lovely. So we could say that this is an image of internal conflict. She's fighting against her grief. She's fighting against having lost her son. She's fighting against herself, knowing that she has to let him go, remembering him. She's fighting against that sense of responsibility. So, guys, just in the next few moments then, just write down that this is an image that's powerlessness. That's a bit of a tongue twister, isn't it? It's not a powerful image, this one. And it's an image of internal conflict, that this person is at war with themselves. So just write that down in the next minute or so. Oh, guys, remember we've already written these quotes down. Sorry, I should have said that. So you're making these notes next to where you've already written the quote down. Brilliant. So leant against it like a wishbone. In this image, in this use of the simile, the writer is creating an image of somebody that is powerlessness, that is disempowered, that has lost their power due to grief, that they're in a state of internal conflict, that they are impacted by war, that it has broken them on the inside, and that they are in grief. It's got lots of lovely diveable ideas coming off of this quote. Okay, so next one. His blood shadow stays on the street. Now, first of all for you, so where you've already written this in your book, his blood shadow stays on your street, just circle what do you think is the standout word in this image and why? So it's kind of like us thinking out loud on paper. So you might circle blood shadow. You've already written these in your books, remember? And you might just say, this is a standout word because. This is an image that's powerful because. So which is the neon standout word in this image? Now, we've already said that it's a metaphor, blood shadow, because it's the words the writer is using to stand for the dead looter, the man that our soldier killed. Now, guys, some of these, this is why it's diveable, because we have to think about big ideas and bigger questions. So is this an image of power or powerlessness? Is this a powerful moment in the poem or a moment of weakness, of a moment of being taken over by something else? And for our soldier, what's he conflicted about? Is it external? Is he at war with something outside of himself, or at war with something on the inside? Or could it be a bit of both? So, now we're thinking out loud on paper, which means we don't have to write full, big, developed sentences, but we might say this is an image of power, powerlessness, because this is a conflict. Our writer is in conflict. So, conflict. What's the soldier, fighting against in this poem? So what's the battle over in this poem? What's our I keep saying that, I do apologise. What's the soldier fighting against? Does the soldier in the poems remains have any power? What's he struggling with in this poem? Okay, so guys, remember, we're just thinking out loud on paper. We're making these notes in our book. So you should have now for this line a neon, a standout word. You should know whether it's an image of power or powerlessness and where the conflict is. So let's have a little think then for the next one. There's not to make reply. There's not to reason why. There's but to do or die. So this is that lovely moment from Charge of the Light Brigade. We got this repetitional rhyme, and it's one of my favourite lines from this poem, because for me it's that summary of that message, that ideology that soldiers don't get to choose, that soldiers are not in control. So that's an image of being powerful as a soldier or powerless. Now, out of this one, what is the neon or the standout word or image? It could be a group of words. So it could be the do or die moment. So you just circle where you wrote this into your book earlier. You circle your standout word and just give me a reason why. So I'm going to say do or die, and I would just make a note next to it. This is the standout image because it literally sums up a soldier's choices. They either obey or they die. So does this make us think that soldiers are in a position of power, or are they powerless? Right, so if they're powerless, who has the power? So we can make a little note that soldiers don't have the power, that the power and the authority belongs to somebody else. That in war, that there are people who have power and authority, but we don't often see them in these poems. Why do you think that is? Because the people in power are safe. They're somewhere else. They're somewhere removed from the danger of war, in a safer position. So what's the conflict? What's the fight in this poem? So if theirs is to do or die, what are they fighting against? Theirs is not to make reply. So there's a conflict. They're fighting against this idea that they want to speak, they want to question and complain and argue. They want to reason, they can think about why what they're being asked to do might be wrong, but they're not allowed. The conflict here is that soldiers are muted. They're told not to speak, not to have an opinion. So actually, if we look at some of these questions, now these will come into play in a minute. So in this poem, who or what has the least power? The soldiers have the least power, don't they? They don't have any power, they just have to obey. Who or what has the most power? So there's the implied powerful people in this poem, isn't it? The people making the decisions, the commanders. Okay, brilliant. So we're thinking out loud on paper, so we've made a few notes and ideas around this key quote. Okay, so now we're into exposure. Remember, we wrote down all these lines at the start. So we're just returning to where we wrote them in our books, and we're just now thinking out loud on paper. This is going to help us have some big ideas and questions to do our last task in a minute. So we cringe in holes. So we've got this we, and we've got this powerful verb choice to cringe. Now, if you're cringing, you're kind of like curled up, you're cowering, you're full of anxiety and fear. And also this, you might be more drawn to this word holes. That might be the word that stands out for you? Why are men living in holes? It almost makes them seem like animals. So remember, where you've written this down in your book, you circle the word that most stands out for you. And then you tell me, is this an image of power or being powerless? Now, some of these poems are easier than others to get a quick answer. Okay, this is not a powerful image. This is an image of being powerless. This is an image of people that have no power, so they're hiding. This is an image of people that are like animals. Yep, so they've got no authority, no command. They are subject to the elements around them. They are hiding. And it's an image of conflict. What are they fighting against? They're fighting against an enemy. They're fighting against the weather. They're fighting against the forces of nature. They're fighting against their own desires to be home. So we've got some ideas for each of those. Now, if you need any extra time, obviously just let the teacher know and they will pause it for you. Okay, and now we're going to look at the next line. Now, we ran out of time looking at bayonet charge. This is one of my favourite similes, and it probably needs a little bit more time than I can give it today, but I'm going to try my best. So this is an image from bayonet charge. It's a simile. Why? Because we've got this like. So the thing about similes, we always need to know, well, what is the thing being described? What is the idea and what's the imaginative vehicle? So when it says in this poem that something is sweating like molten iron from his chest, the first thing is molten iron. Now, iron is metal. Yep, can you all visualize like a big iron rod, a big piece of metal? But molten iron is that if you heat any metal, now often it has to get really, really hot, guys. This is science for you. Yep, to heat metal, it often needs to get very hot, but it begins to melt and to warp. Now, something is sweating out of this soldier's chest like melting iron. And when you actually look at the bigger stanza, where it comes from in the stanza, it is his patriotism. It's his kleos. So if we think about the idea of kleos and patriotism, the idea that soldiers believed that they were fighting for glory, that they were fighting for national pride, that they were fighting for something bigger than themselves, and they bought into this idea of kleos, of glory. Now, in bayonet charge, very quickly, because this is stanza 1, he doesn't come to this place at the end of the poem. As soon as he is awake and facing the reality of charging across the field into the night, into an onslaught of bullets, everything that he believes, his beliefs, his patriotism, his sense of glory, literally melts from his chest. I love that. And I like it because sometimes we talk about bravery, like being like you steel yourself in order to be brave. You are, a man of iron. Hello, Iron Man. Yep. A man of iron. You are strong and you steel yourself. And that's where your courage and your bravery come from. But this poem is dismantling that idea. And it's showing us that the reality for this soldier is that as soon as he is awake and running to his death, all of that courage, that false bravery, that false iron melts. So under the pressure, under the heat of facing his own death, of facing danger, his courage, his patriotism melts and sweats out like molten iron. It's a beautiful simile. So for me, the standout word there would be molten iron, but you might want to circle the word sweating because that reminds us that conditions of being a soldier, it's hot, it's exhausting, it's difficult. Now chest, yep, you might look at that word. So it's coming from his heart. It's coming from the seat of his feelings and beliefs. This idea, this change. Okay, so does this soldier feel powerful in this moment? Sweating like molten iron from his chest. Do we get a sense of a powerful soldier or a weak soldier? So just make a note here that this is an image of power or powerlessness because the soldier, does he seem weak or strong? Does he seem in command and in control of himself? Or is there a lack of control and command? Okay, so if he's powerful, if he's got power, he would be in control and command of himself. Is this an image of conflict? Does this make you think that this guy is winning or losing? What's he fighting against? Brilliant. So last but not least, okay, war photographer. Now, war photographer has many images. I've gone with this one, this powerful metaphor. 100 agonies in black and white. So black and white, so if we think about which is the standout word for you, is a reference to black and white photographs. Yep. So there's a lovely juxtaposition here because 100 agonies in black and white. So a photographer captures 100 agonies in black and white. So the photographs of this photographer capture what? What is our photographer capturing in these black and white images? 100 agonies. So here's the metaphor. This photographer isn't taking pictures of people. He's capturing moments of agony, of extreme pain and suffering, and it's hundreds of them. It's too numerous. So this is an image of, again, the reality of war. And the reality of war is that it reduces people to pain, to agony, to injury, to hurt. And so we've got 100 agonies in black and white. So do you think, now this might be a bit harder, is this a powerful image or not? Is there any control or command in this image? Is there any attempt to control? Do you think the war photographer in this image capturing 100 agonies in black and white is coming across as powerful or weak? Is that maybe the conflict? That the photographer themselves has power. He's able to control the photos that he takes, what he develops. But actually the pictures that he's taking are of people that have no control. So, guys, you've now looked at each of these images, and now we're going to dive in bigger, okay? So we wrote these down, you've made your notes around them, and now we're going to use them to work through our last consolidation grid. Now, this grid is about big ideas and bigger questions, so it really is about a springboard to the highest grades in understanding. Now, hopefully, as I speak, you've either been given these already. Now, across the top, we've got the names of the poems: Charge, Exposure, Bayonet, Kamikaze, Remains, Poppies, and War Photographer. And down the side, you have some conflicts that really help us to unpack power and conflict and those definitions. Now, not all of these are going to be answered in all the poems. So it's not that you will have something in every box for every poem. But I'm going to ask that you get, as a minimum, 3 questions per poem. Okay? So once you've got, maybe if you started with Charge the Light Brigade, now this is, you can talk. I'm sure Miss or Sarah will be happy for you to talk in pairs. So as you work through, as soon as you get 3, move on to the next poem. As soon as you get 3, move on to the next poem. Or you might look down and think, actually, I think that's an easy question. Who or what has the most power in the poem? So I could do that moving across the grid. Now, let's look at these questions. So it says, question number 1, what are the opposing forces that are struggling, clashing against each other in this poem? So in Charge of the Light Brigade, you could say, well, it's literally a struggle, a clash between two sides. Yep, so you've got the Charge of the Light Brigade, that group of soldiers, against the against the into the jaws of death, against the enemy. So you could say Charge of the Light Brigade versus the enemy, and you've got something in that poem. In Exposure, what are the opposing forces? What are the things that are clashing against each other in the poem? So you could say the English soldiers versus the German. Now that's what we call a literal reading. Yep, so here, Bayonet Charge, we've got a soldier versus the enemy. Okay, now Kamikaze, we've got a Japanese pilot again. So you could do a literal reading, or you could think more symbolically. What's at war? It's a struggle over power. It's a struggle over land. Okay, now you move across the poems and you might not be able to answer that one for Poppies, or you might have to think differently. So in Poppies, what is she struggling against? What are the opposing forces? Now, I would say actually you could apply that to Poppies, isn't it? There's a desire to remember her child, but that it's too painful to do it. So you start to fill in. Remember, for each poem, you only need a minimum of 3. If you get the 3, you move on to another poem, and then you begin to consolidate. And again, look, it's not huge boxes, so we're looking about keywords and ideas. So what emotions are in conflict? Which emotion is more powerful? So in Charge of the Light Brigade, you could say there's the emotion of pride and heroism versus fear and being afraid. Oh, that's actually in Bayonet Charge, that same feeling. So you will see that again, there might be similar or reoccurring answers. That's going to give us links. That's going to make us think, oh, Bayonet Charge and Charge of the Light Brigade Both show a conflict in emotions. Both show people that are conflicted, or soldiers that are conflicted against this sense of pride and patriotism versus their fear and anxiety. So let's have a look. Is a fight going on in the real world or inside the personal? Both. So you could say Charge of the Light Brigade is a real world fight. Exposure, there's a fight going on. Absolutely, there's a real war. But you've also got the internal struggle of the soldiers. Now, what is the battle over in the poem? What are they fighting over? Who or what has the most power? So in Charge of the Light Brigade, who or what has the most power? Now, you could say, Charge of the Light Brigade, what has the most power? The great big scary cannons. Yeah, they're pretty powerful, more powerful than a human maybe. Or you might say the commanders. So it's not that you will always come to one single answer, but it's the idea that you're generating answers for each poem in response to each of these questions. Who or what has the least power? Now, this one, although we've only been looking at lines, you do have your anthologies. So is the conflict, the fight, struggle, resolved or reconciled, or is it ongoing? So guys, that's your final task, to try and get 3 ideas for each poem. If you get more, brilliant. I really do wish you a wonderful, happy holiday. Guys, it's really important that you put your yellow books and your anthologies together, because they're going to be taken back to the library and redistributed to your new teachers for next year. Okay, have a wonderful summer, and thank you very much for working so hard. You've been wonderful.